The herbs she had been drying for 3 weeks smelled like rot. Vera stood in the doorway of the pack's healing room and looked at the bundles hanging from the ceiling rafters. Lavender and yarrow and white willow bark, things she had gathered herself from the ridge before the drought set in, and registered, without much feeling, that they had gone grey at the edges. The dry heat had killed them before they could cure properly. She untied each bundle and dropped them into the waste bin by the door. Her hands were steady. They were always steady now. She had learned in 2 years of this how to do things without feeling them. The Stonehollow Pack's healing room occupied the east corner of the compound's lowest building, a squat structure of pale sandstone that collected heat like a kiln from April to October. 2 small windows, both south-facing, both useless, a wooden table that had been old when Vera arrived, shelves lined with the tinctures and salves she had made herself, because the pack's previous healer had taken everything when he left, and no one had thought to replace what he'd taken before they brought her in to fill the gap. They hadn't brought her in, exactly. She had come because her mother had asked her to, because Vera's mother had been friends with someone whose sister was bonded to someone in Stonehollow, and the chain of connection had been long enough and tenuous enough that Vera had understood when she agreed that she was not a guest. She was a service. That had been 2 years ago. She was 24 then. She was 26 now. And her wolf had been silent for 14 months. She didn't tell anyone. That was the thing about being the healer. People brought you their pain, which meant they were looking at their own wounds and not at yours. Vera pressed her hand to her sternum sometimes, in the quiet of the healing room after the last patient had left, and she waited for the familiar push of that second consciousness against the inside of her ribs, the one that had been there since she was 8 years old and first shifted in her parents' backyard on a cold October afternoon, terrifying the neighbor's dog and her own mother in equal measure. 14 months of nothing. She had her theories. The work itself, she channeled something when she healed, some interior warmth that she'd never had a name for, that moved through her hands into the people she was treating. She'd watched it work. A child with a fever that broke faster than it should have, a warrior with a torn shoulder that knit in half the time the bone setter predicted. She hadn't told anyone about that either, because the one time she had mentioned it, carefully, to Alpha Hollis, he had looked at her with the specific kind of blankness that told her he wasn't interested in information that complicated the arrangement they had. The arrangement she healed. They kept her. It wasn't cruel, it was simply imprecise in the same way that forgetting is imprecise, not deliberate, not personal, just the natural consequence of a priority list on which her name did not appear. Her food came from the pack kitchen, which ran on a rotating meal schedule organized by rank. Stonehollow was not a large pack, maybe 60 wolves, most of them clustered in the upper residential tier near the training grounds, and the kitchen was efficient. Warriors first, families second, the unmated, unranked, and auxiliary personnel third. Vera fell into a category that did not have a name on the schedule, which meant she ate after third tier, which meant she ate whatever the kitchen had left at the point in the evening when it was easier to cover the pots than to serve another plate. Most nights, it was something. Rice with the good parts picked out, bread that had passed its peak by a day, soup that had thinned from the first service. She ate standing at the kitchen counter because sitting at the tables felt like a claim she hadn't earned, and 2 years had worn that feeling smooth, the way a river wears a stone, until she no longer noticed it as a wound. It was simply the shape of things. The day the convoy arrived, Vera was in the upper courtyard at dawn, pulling water from the community cistern, because the pipe to the healing room had cracked in July, and no one had fixed it yet. The drought had been going on for 19 months. Stonehollow sat at the base of the amber ridge, a rust-colored escarpment of sedimentary rock that caught the sun at noon and held the heat until midnight, radiating it back into the compound like a second sky. The springs that fed the cisterns had been dropping since the previous summer, and the landscape around the pack had gone the color of old paper, the scrub grass lying flat against the cracked earth, the Joshua trees that lined the eastern ridge looking more skeletal than they used to. Vera filled her second jug and was reaching for the third when she felt it. Not in her ears. In her chest, a resonance low and directional, like the subsonic thrum of a truck engine, felt through the soles of your shoes before you can hear the vehicle itself. She straightened. Her hand went to her sternum automatically. And she would swear to this. Later she would stake everything she had left on this. Something moved, a single pulse. The way a coal glows red for a moment when you blow on it. Then it was gone. She picked up the jug and went back to the healing room. The convoy was 7 vehicles. She saw them from the window as they rolled through the compound's main gate in the early afternoon, raising a plume of pale dust that hung in the still air long after the engines cut. Black vehicles, clean despite the road, which meant they had not come from anywhere close. The pack's warriors straightened as they passed. Vera watched Alpha Hollis come out of the administrative building to receive the visitors, and something in the set of his shoulders told her he had been expecting this. She went back to her work. She had 2 patients to see before dark. An elderly wolf with joint inflammation that she managed twice a week, and a pup whose ear infection had cleared but whose mother wanted a final check. She focused on those things. She did not let herself speculate about convoys. It was Margit who told her. Margit ran the kitchen and was the only person in Stonehollow who ever came to the healing room when she wasn't sick. Dominion inspection, Margit said, setting a covered plate on Vera's work table without being asked, leftover flatbread and cold beans and half an apple better than usual, which meant Margit had intercepted it before third service. The high alphas doing rounds of the southern packs. Stonehollow is the last stop before he turns north. Vera looked up from the tincture she was straining. Which high alpha? Daxton Coin. Margit said it with the weight of a name everyone knew, Lord of the Amber Dominion. Vera turned back to the tincture. How long will they stay? 3 days, maybe 4. You'll need to have the healing room presentable. Margit glanced at the cracked pipe in the corner, at the grey-edged bundles in the waste bin, at the shelves that were half-stocked because Vera had been stretching supplies for 6 months without resupply. She pressed her lips together and didn't say anything, because Margit was practical in the way that people become practical when they have worked in proximity to problems for long enough that solutions feel beside the point. I'll manage, Vera said. She stayed late that evening, scrubbing the sandstone floor on her hands and knees because the mop handle had split and she hadn't asked for a replacement. The work was physical, and the physicality helped. Her shoulders ached, her knees went numb on the cold stone, and the discomfort was simple and located, unlike the other kind. She was still there when the compound went quiet, and the only lights were the low sodium lamps at the gate. Around midnight, she found the box. She hadn't been looking for anything. She was reorganizing the lower shelf, rotating stock so the oldest supplies were in front, when she moved a crate of empty glass jars and found something wedged behind it. A flat wooden box about the size of a large book, sealed with a small brass latch that had gone green with age. It smelled. This was the part she would think about later. It smelled like the high desert after rain. Like ozone and wet clay and something floral she couldn't identify, wild roses maybe, but warmer. She did not open it. She set it on the work table and looked at it for a moment, then placed it on the top shelf where she could see it and went back to reorganizing. She finished at 2 in the morning. She washed her hands at the basin, changed out of her work clothes into the one clean set she kept in the cabinet beneath the supply shelf, dark grey linen pants and a plain white shirt that had been washed enough times to go soft, and she braided her hair with damp fingers. It was dark brown and long, past her shoulder blades, because she had not thought to cut it since arriving at Stonehollow, and there had not seemed to be a reason to think about it. She ate the flatbread Margit had left while standing at the work table. looking at the sealed wooden box on the upper shelf, and then she lay down on the narrow cot in the back corner of the healing room and stared at the ceiling until sleep found her. She dreamed of water, not the drought-thin trickle of the cistern feed, a real river, fast and cold, glacier-fed, the kind that runs green in summer and sounds like static. She was standing on a bank of grey stones, barefoot, and a woman was sitting on a boulder a little downstream. The woman had silver hair and young eyes, a contradiction that didn't seem strange in the dream, and she was looking at Vera the way you look at something you have been waiting a long time to see. "You've been running quiet," the woman said. "My wolf doesn't answer anymore," Vera said. "She's not gone." The woman tilted her head. "She's waiting for something loud enough." Vera woke at dawn to the sound of boots in the corridor outside. Not Margit's shuffling kitchen walk. Something heavier, more deliberate, the kind of footfall that expected clearance without asking for it. She sat up. The healing room was grey with early light, the air already warming toward the day's heat. She heard voices, 2, maybe 3, moving past the door, and then receding toward the compound's east wing where the guest quarters were. She dressed. She started the morning's work. The High Alpha of the Amber Dominion did not arrive at her door by chance. He arrived at 10 in the morning, preceded by a woman named Councillor Sen. Tall, efficient, the kind of person who moved through rooms like she was already 3 moves ahead, who knocked once and entered without waiting, which Vera noted but did not comment on. "The High Alpha wants to see the compound's medical facilities," Sen said. "You have 5 minutes to prepare." Vera looked at the room. There was nothing to prepare that wasn't already done. "It's ready," she said. Sen's eyes did a rapid sweep, the organized shelves, the clean work table, the stacked supplies, and something shifted in her expression that wasn't quite approval but was adjacent to it. "He'll be here shortly." She left. Vera straightened the already straight instruments on the tray beside the work table and waited. She felt him before she heard him. The same resonance from yesterday morning, low and directional, but stronger now, close enough to be undeniable. Something moved in her chest, not the single pulse from before, a sustained vibration, like a string being bowed. Her wolf. Vera pressed her palm flat against her sternum and stood there for a moment, very still, cataloguing what she was feeling. Because she was a healer, and healers catalogued, it was how they functioned in the presence of things that were frightening. The vibration built, pressed, pushed outward from behind her ribs with a warmth that radiated up through her throat and down through her fingertips. 14 months of silence. The door opened. Daxton Coin was not what the stories described, which in her experience was true of everything the stories described. The stories said tall he was. They said dark. He was. Dark hair, dark eyes, the kind of complexion that had spent years in high-altitude sun and retained a permanent weathered quality that wasn't quite tan. They said powerful, and that part she had expected to be rhetoric, the kind of adjective that accumulated around leaders through proximity and reputation. It was not rhetoric. He filled the doorway in a way that was not about size, though size was part of it. It was the quality of attention he brought with him, a stillness so complete that everything else in the room rearranged itself around the fact of him. He looked at the healing room the way a person looks at a problem they are in the process of solving, eyes moving, registering, assigning value, and then his eyes stopped, on her. She was standing behind the work table with her palm flat on her own chest, which she realized too late, and lowered her hand. His gaze tracked the movement. His nostrils flared once, barely perceptible. "This is the pack's healer," he said. He was not asking her. He was asking Sen, who had entered behind him. "Vera," Sen said. "She's been with the pack 2 years. 2 years." His voice was even, but something moved beneath it, and in 2 years who authorized her supply requisitions. Sen paused. Those would go through the pack administrator. Pull the records. He said it without taking his eyes off Vera. "When was this facility last restocked?" Vera answered before Sen could, because the question had been asked in her room about her work. and she was done with the habit of waiting for other people to speak on her behalf. 18 months ago, she said, a partial resupply. Before that, I inherited what the previous healer left, which wasn't much. I've been supplementing from my own gathering, but the drought has cut access to most of the ridge plants. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't immediately read. It was not pity. It was something more focused than pity, more directed, as if he had just had a question confirmed that he had been carrying for a while. "Show me," he said. She showed him. She went through every shelf, every supply, told him what was adequate, what was depleted, what was gone entirely. She did not soften it or minimize it. She spoke in the flat, precise language she used with patience, because the facts were the facts, and adding warmth to them did not make them less true. He listened without interrupting. Sen took notes. At the end, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How many patients do you see a week? 20 on average. More during the heat spikes. With depleted supplies. Yes. How?" She looked at him steadily. "I manage." She saw it, a containment, brief, like a door held firmly shut from the inside. He turned his head toward Sen. "I want a full Dominion resupply requisition today. Medical grade, full spectrum. I also want the pipe fixed before we leave." He looked at the cracked pipe in the corner as if it had personally offended him. "The pipe's been cracked since July," Vera said. "I mentioned it to the pack administrator in August." "And?" He said he'd put in a work order. Daxton turned and walked out of the healing room. She heard him, a moment later, saying something to Alpha Hollis in the corridor that was very quiet and very even, which she had already learned was more dangerous than loud. She stood in her clean, half-stocked healing room and felt the vibration in her chest settling into something lower and steadier, like a heartbeat she had almost forgotten she was missing. He came back at dusk. Vera was alone, doing her end-of-day inventory. She heard the footsteps and knew them already, had apparently memorized them in a single morning, which said something she wasn't ready to examine. He knocked this time. "Come in," she said. He stepped inside and closed the door. The evening light came through the south window at a low angle, turning the sandstone walls amber, making the room look warmer than it was. He was not in the official posture from this morning, shoulders not quite as set. The formal quality of his bearing shifted towards something that was still authoritative, but less performed. "You didn't tell Hollis," he said, "about your supplies, about the pipe." He knew, Vera said. Telling him again would have just been noise. Most people would have escalated. "To whom?" "The pack administrator answers to Hollis. The resource committee reports to Hollis. Escalating would have meant going over his head to the Dominion office, and I had no standing to do that." "You have standing," he said. "You're the pack's designated healer. That is a protected Dominion designation with direct reporting rights." She stared at him. "No one told me that." "No." Something moved through his eyes. "I imagine they didn't." He crossed to the work table and stood on the opposite side of it from her, which meant there was 3 feet of worn wood between them, which felt both appropriate and insufficient. "How long has your wolf been silent?" he asked. The question hit her like cold water. She had not expected it. Of all the things, the facility, the supplies, the administrative failures, this was not what she had expected him to ask. "How did you know?" she said instead of answering. "I can feel a wolf's presence when I'm near a shifter. It's part of what I do." He paused. "I felt yours from the moment I crossed the compound's perimeter this morning. It's not absent, it's compressed, like it's under pressure. 14 months, she said. It started going quiet gradually and then stopped answering entirely." He looked at the hand she had unconsciously pressed her sternum again. "Has it moved since I arrived?" She lowered her hand. "Yes," she said. Twice. He was still for a moment. Then he said, quietly, "There are things the Dominion records suggest about your family line, Vera. Things I wasn't sure of until this morning." "What things?" "Your mother's family. The Aldenvane line 3 generations back." He said it carefully, like a person carrying something fragile. There's a bloodline that appears in Dominion records roughly every few generations. Healers, usually. Sometimes seers. Always wolves whose gifts are atypical. Wolves that tend to suppress themselves in environments that aren't equipped to handle them, because the alternative is destabilizing to the pack. Vera was very still. You're saying my wolf suppressed itself. I'm saying it's possible that what you experience as a gift, the healing, the warmth you move through your hands into patience. He stopped. You do know what I'm talking about. She hadn't told anyone. Yes, she said, that isn't a standard skill set. He came around the work table, slowly, deliberately, not crowding, giving her room to register his approach and decide how to respond. She didn't move, and a wolf that carries that kind of gift sometimes folds itself down to fit the space it's been given. Not because it's broken, because it's self-aware enough to know what the space can hold. She looked up at him. He was close enough now that she could feel the warmth coming off him, which she was fairly certain was not a normal warmth, not entirely human. His eyes in the amber light of the room were very dark, and they were watching her with a focused attention that she was running out of surface area to deflect. My wolf's not small, she said. It came out more certain than she felt, but it was true. She'd always known it was true. The pack healer before me, when I was 17 and first came into my abilities, he said he'd never encountered a wolf that size in someone without dominant rank. He told my parents to keep it quiet, because in the wrong pack it would have been seen as a threat. Daxton's voice had gone very level, or an asset to be controlled. The room was quiet. Outside, she could hear the distant sound of the compound's evening activity, voices from the mess hall, the clang of the training grounds winding down. I need to tell you something, she said, and I need you to not make it into more than it is, because I'm telling you for clinical reasons, not because I want. I don't know what I want, but you should know. When you walked into this room this morning, my wolf moved for the first time in 14 months. He said nothing. She made herself look at him. I know what a mate bond is, she said. I know what the first indicators feel like. My mother described it when I was young because she said her mother never told her, and she ended up confused and frightened, and she didn't want that for me. Her jaw was tight. So I'm not confused. I'm not frightened. I'm just telling you, because you're standing in my healing room asking about my wolf, and it seems like relevant information. He held her gaze, and she could see that he was holding something very tightly in check. When I crossed the perimeter this morning, he said, I thought it was a residual resonance from the Dominion records. A name on a list, an old bloodline, something historical. I've been reviewing the southern packs for weeks, and the work tends to blur. He paused, and then I walked through the compound gate, and my wolf stopped. It has not moved since. It's been standing still for 6 hours, pointing at the east corner of this compound like a compass pointing north. She sat down on the edge of the work table because her knees had made a decision she hadn't consciously authorized. Okay, she said, that's your response. I haven't slept well in a long time, and I've been working on the supply inventory since 4 this morning, she said. Give me a moment. He sat down on the healer's stool across from her, which put them at approximately the same height, and waited, which was the correct thing to do. She noticed that. She was a healer, she catalogued. I'm not going back to what this was, she said eventually. I want to be clear about that. Whatever comes next, I'm not returning to eating cold soup at a kitchen counter because no one scheduled my meals. I'm not patching people up with half-empty tinctures and hoping the ridge plants grow back before the next fever season. Whatever I was being here, I was not the pack's healer. I was the pack's resource. I know, he said. It was simple and immediate, with no qualification attached. That's it? No defense of Hollis's administration. Hollis's administration is currently under a Dominion review that I initiated approximately 20 minutes after leaving this room this morning. His voice was still even. She was beginning to understand that evenness was not neutrality for him. It was a container for things that, if he didn't hold them in check, would occupy considerably more space. He had a Dominion-designated healer on site with a cracked water pipe and an 18-month supply gap, and he submitted quarterly reports to the council describing the facility as operational. That is a falsified report. That has consequences. Vera was quiet for a moment. There are other unmated wolves in this pack who eat below the allocation line, she said. Not many, but some. 2, maybe 3. Older women, mostly. The kind of people who don't make noise. I'll have my team identify them. He looked at her steadily. Is there anything else I should know about the state of this pack before I spend the next 12 hours reviewing Hollis's records? She thought about the box on the upper shelf. She got up and retrieved it, set it on the work table between them. I found this last night behind the supply crates. I haven't opened it. He looked at it. May I? She nodded. He unlatched the brass clasp carefully and lifted the lid. Inside, on a lining of faded cloth that had once been green, was a glass vial about the length of her finger, sealed with wax and containing something silver-grey, and beneath the vial a letter, folded many times, written in handwriting she did not recognize. She reached for the letter. He let her take it. It was addressed, in that old handwriting, to the healer of Stonehollow, when she arrives. The date on the letter was 40 years ago. Her hands were not steady. That was the first time in 2 years they had not been steady. The letter was from a woman who had been the compound's healer a generation before the previous one. She had written it, she said, because she had a sense. Not a vision, not a certainty, but a sense, the kind that healers of their line developed when they paid attention, that someone would come to this room eventually who needed to know that the gift they carried was not a malfunction, that the wolf that seemed too large for its container was not broken, that the silence was not an absence. You are not too much, the letter said toward the end. You have been in the wrong room. The right room is coming. Vera folded the letter along its old creases and set it back in the box. Daxton had not read over her shoulder. He had waited. She knew, Vera said. Healers of that line generally do, he said. It's part of the gift. She looked at him across the work table, this man with his compass wolf and his dark eyes and his very controlled voice and the Dominion review he had initiated 20 minutes after meeting her. How long do your inspections usually take? She asked. 3 days. And after 3 days your convoy goes north. Yes, I'd like to come with you, she said. It came out even, which cost her something, but it was the right tone. Direct, not asking for rescue, asking for something she had earned the right to want. Not as a political symbol, not as a bloodline asset. I'm a healer, and I'm good at it, and I want a facility that functions and supplies that don't run out, and I want my wolf back. Her voice stayed level, but she felt the vibration in her chest surge when she said it, pressing outward, warming her sternum. I want to find out what it can actually do when it's not folded down to fit. He looked at her for a long moment. The controlled thing in his eyes was close to the surface now. My Dominion has a medical center with full equipment and 3 research healers who have been waiting 2 years for someone to lead the department. He paused. I have been waiting 29 years for you specifically, though I didn't know your name until this morning. That's very efficient of you, she said. Waiting without knowing. I've had a lot of practice staying organized. She pressed her lips together, the almost smile. She hadn't smiled in a long time, and her face remembered the shape of it with a vividness that was embarrassing. 3 days, she said. Let me see what you're like in 3 days. He stood. Then I'll need to be very deliberate about the next 3 days. You seem like someone who's deliberate about most things, with important things. He moved to the door. There's a full dinner service running tonight. First-tier seating. Sen has already added your name to the guest list. You're assuming I'll come. He looked back at her. The control had slipped just slightly, and beneath it was something warm and specific, directed entirely at her. You haven't eaten properly in 2 years, he said. Come for the food. I'll earn the rest. She came for the food. The mess hall had been set for the official dinner, which in Stonehollow's terms meant actual table linens and ceramic plates, and someone had found candles for the center tables. Vera sat at the first-tier table and ate roasted lamb with rosemary and root vegetables glazed with something sweet, and fresh bread that had not been sitting since morning, and a glass of dark juice that she thought might be pomegranate, and she ate slowly and did not close her eyes, even though she wanted to. Daxton sat across from her and talked to Alpha Hollis beside him with the kind of precise, even-voiced political conversation that was not conversation at all. She watched his face between bites. He caught her watching once and said nothing, but the corner of his mouth moved in a way that was private and brief, and not meant for anyone else at the table. She ate everything on her plate. It was the most she had eaten at a single meal in 2 years. That night, returning to the healing room, she stopped in the courtyard. The sky above the Amber Ridge was clear and enormous, the way desert skies are enormous, stars laid out in their full density, without city light to bleach them. The drought-dry air smelled of warm stone and distant pine. She pressed her hand to her chest, her wolf pressed back. Not a pulse this time, a sustained presence, awake and specific, the shape of something she had known since she was 8 years old and had spent 14 months convincing herself was gone. It was not gone. It had been very, very quiet. It had been waiting for something loud enough. She went inside and did not feel cold. The next 3 days dismantled Stonehollow's administration with the methodical efficiency of someone who had done this before and found it neither satisfying nor distressing, simply necessary. Dominion auditors arrived with the second morning. Hollis's financial records were opened. The supply falsifications were documented. The unmated wolves eating below the allocation line were identified. There were 4, not 3, including Margit, which Vera had not known and which settled something in her chest like a stone finding the bottom of still water. Daxton moved through it all with that controlled evenness, making it look procedural, which it was, but which also contained something underneath that she could feel through the mate bond like barometric pressure before rain. The bond had settled in by the second day, a low-frequency hum that was loudest when he was in the same room and achiest when he wasn't. She told him about the healing, the real scope of it, not just the surface triage she did daily, but the deeper work, the fever that broke too fast, the shoulder that knit in half the time. He listened without interrupting, which she noticed, and when she finished, he asked 2 very specific questions about mechanism and timing that told her he had some knowledge of this already, which made sense if the Aldenvane line appeared in Dominion records. "You've been doing this with no training," he said. "No guidance," she said. "I figured most of it out by watching what worked. My Dominion has records going back 4 generations on healers with this lineage." He was sitting on the healer's stool again. He had a habit of choosing the lower seat in her healing room, which she had decided was deliberate, a choice not to loom. "You have been doing this for 2 years in an underfunded facility on a depleted ridge with no support, and your patients have had better outcomes than most packs twice." Stonehollow's sighs. "That's a low bar. It's a meaningful one." He looked at her steadily. "Vera, what did you want to be before Stonehollow?" She was quiet for a moment. "This," she said, "a healer, but the proper kind. The kind who has the equipment and the training and the staff to do it right. I wanted a lab. I wanted to study the gift, actually understand what it does at the cellular level, whether it could be taught or whether it was lineage-specific." She paused. "I got a cracked pipe and a mop that needed a new handle," he said. "The research facility at Dominion headquarters has a full lab. I've been looking for a chief healer for 8 months." She looked at him. "That's either the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me, or the most efficient hire in Dominion history. It can be both." The almost smile, again but fuller this time, reaching somewhere that changed the whole geometry of his face. She stored it away. She was a healer. She catalogued. She told him she would go on the 3rd morning, standing in the courtyard while the convoy was being loaded. Margit had come to say goodbye and had pressed a cloth-wrapped package into Vera's hands that turned out to be the rest of the flatbread from yesterday and a small jar of the kitchen's preserved fig, which was Margit's particular specialty and not something she gave to everyone. "You take care of yourself," Margit said, "for once." "I'll try," Vera said. "Come to the Dominion. Properly, I mean. There are positions open in the domestic division." Margit's eyes went sharp with interest, which was its own kind of goodbye. Vera walked to the convoy and Daxton met her halfway across the courtyard, which she noticed and which she thought was probably deliberate. He looked at the cloth package under her arm. "Provisions," she said. "I have 3 cooks. I'm aware. This is from Margit. It's different." She looked up at him. The morning was already warm, the amber ridge catching the early light and turning it copper. "Before we go, I need to know something. Ask if the research leads somewhere uncomfortable, if what we find about my lineage is complicated, politically. I need to know that I'm not going to become an asset to be managed." He held her gaze. "You're my mate," he said. It was simple, unadorned, no diplomatic texture on it at all. "Not a strategy. If it becomes a political complication, I will handle the politics. That is my job. Your job is the work you want to do." She looked at him for a long moment. The bond hummed between them, steady as a river. Her wolf, fully awake now, pressed warmly against the inside of her ribs and did not withdraw. "Okay," she said. "That's your response. I told you. Give me time. I'll get more expansive." He laughed. Short, real, the sound of something genuinely surprised. She filed it away alongside the smile. They left at dawn. Vera sat in the lead vehicle beside Daxton and watched the amber ridge recede through the rear window, the rust-colored escarpment shrinking against the morning sky. She did not feel sorrow. She felt the thing that comes after a very long-held breath. Not relief exactly, something more structural. A realignment. Her wolf was awake beside the one that had been looking for her. She opened Margit's package and offered Daxton a piece of flatbread without thinking, and he took it without comment, and they drove north through the pale desert morning with the mountains rising ahead of them, blue and immense and full of things she didn't know yet. She was ready to learn them.